Duh.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Kay Swope, and as I mentioned, we're reviewing Superman 2 today. I'm going to cut straight to the chase and get right into things. Here's how this review is going to work. I'm going to talk about the good things I found about the movie, the bad things I found about the movie, and then go over a few notes. And then at the end, I'll be ranking the movie on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the sensation of stepping on a Lego brick, 10 being Citizen Kane. So, without further ado, let's dive right in and start with my first good point. First things first, if you have not watched my review for Superman, the 1978 one, go check that out because I'll be referring to that quite a bit given this is the direct sequel. And one of the points I made in that review was the opening credits. They looked great. They had the great John Williams score and everything like that, but they felt way too long, okay? Lost my interest. This one is much, much better because during the opening credits, they're also recapping the first movie, which is great because if you have not seen the first movie in some time, it's a good reminder. Very much reminds me of what they do in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. So highly recommend that. It is very, very good technique and very, very well done. So I greatly appreciated seeing that. The plot of this movie also centers around, I guess, what's maybe a bit of a plot hole or a dangling plot thread that doesn't really get a whole lot of spotlight after the first couple of minutes of the first Superman movie, and that is, of course, General Zod and his goons, because they're there, they push him to the Phantom Zone, all that stuff. So I think it's good that they're picking up the loose plot threads, but I don't think it's good as a filmmaking technique that they left those plot threads in that movie to begin with, because that's just not a good sign of filmmaking. Completely jumping ship, though, to a different topic. This film feels like it's got much better and more exciting stakes than the first Superman film does, and I think that has to do very much with the villains, which I'm going to say a good bit about them later, but the stakes feel larger, they feel grander. They were like giant bombs, being threatened, they were going to destroy the San Andreas fault line in the first one and stuff, but that really just felt like it was sprung on you at the end of the movie, whereas this one feels like there's a lingering tension throughout the whole film, kind of because they're cutting back and forth between what Superman and Lois are up to and what Zod and his goons are up to, and I think it makes it for a much more compelling story, and I think it makes the stakes at least feel higher, whether they're actually higher or not. So, again, give credit there. It is good. I also think in this film, a lot more than the last one, Christopher Reeves really shows off his range. Because there's a lot more, material for Superman to work with in this film. He feels like more of a fleshed out character. So, we start off, he's, Clark Kent, Superman, that dichotomy, that's going on. That's all fine and dandy. We've seen that already. But this one's really interesting because the plot heavily follows Lois Lane finding out that Clark Kent is Superman and kind of dealing with that. And that really takes Superman to some very interesting places emotionally. And I think Christopher Reeve does a really, really good job at that. So I got to say, his acting here really shows, and we see his range very, very well. And I do quite appreciate that. But jumping things back now to Zod and his goons. I really like them as villains, as I said that before. And I think they were really good villains because Lex Luthor tried to challenge Superman in ways, but it felt like they didn't have enough material for him, that they couldn't pull off a good, Lex Luthor alone thing. And that was very much, I think, heavily inspired by the comics at the time, because that's before, Lex Luthor was known to have his mech suit and things like that. And as times have changed, and he can, go toe-to-toe with Superman a little more directly now, instead of trying to pull all these stunts, try to foil Superman's plans. Whereas Zod and his fellas, and I forget what his friends' names are, but the other Kryptonian guys, they can go toe-to-toe with Superman. They do go toe-to-toe with Superman, and that is very, very interesting, and I prefer that a lot over Lex Luthor. But speaking of Lex Luthor, he is still here. Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor is still in this film, and I think his use in this film is so much better than in the last film as well, because we see him and he's in jail when we first see him. He's with Otis, which more on that later. He takes more of a support role for the villains. So what happens is he's able to, from jail, build some equipment, some devices and things, and figure out that Superman likes to retreat up north. So, the whole Fortress of Solitude. So he goes in there, he gets a lot of Kryptonian information. And then when he sees the whole Zod thing going on, he's like, aha! This is an opportunity. So he goes in and joins Zod and friends' side to help foil Superman. And I think it's just a much better use of the character, if you ask me, especially if he can't go toe-to-toe with Superman. He can still battle wits in a way, and I think the way he's battling wits in this film is better because it also complements the villains that we have already, and it makes him, in my opinion, a more likable, nuanced character. Gene Hackman, by the way, still does a fantastic job. He wears the wig a little less in this film, and the one that he is wearing, I just think looks better. Nitpick, I know, but hey, again, gotta give credit where credit is due. Jumping back to Lex Luthor's dumb sidekicks, though. Otis is in this movie a little bit, but not much. Thank goodness, because I cannot stand that guy. And then his lady henchman, she is in it a little bit, but not a lot. I mean, she's a lot better of a character, if you ask me, than Otis. So not a whole lot of complaints there, but again, credit where credit is due. I think it's great. Now we're going to jump back into the bad things, unfortunately. There is some good, there is some bad. We're talking about the bad things now. First bad thing is if you watch my other Superman review, I'm going to put a timestamp right here. I want you to watch. I want you to go look at it and just to know what's going on. Hopefully that makes sense. And then come right back here. And that appears in that opening credits I told you about. And I absolutely loathe it. I hate it. Why? That does not need to be there. Anyways, that's bad. That's very bad. Moving along. I think it's also funny, too, because General Zod and his compadres, they are in the Phantom Zone in that floating glass thingy, right? We all remember that quite well. And when Superman is in the Fortress of Solitude, the hologram of his mom gives very oddly specific circumstances to break someone out of the Phantom Zone, which happens earlier in the film, which is basically a nuke needs to be like shot off into space and it needs to shatter the thing, which is what happened. And I'm thinking to myself, like, that's kind of insane. That's a little stupid, not gonna lie, because I think it made enough sense where just the explosion shattered the thing and they broke out. Okay, that's not a big deal. But the fact that they specifically state that it has to be nuclear, I'm like, that is so oddly specific. That's such an oddly specific thing to just randomly happen that I'm just like, okay, you're losing me here. I do have a few nitpicks I do have to say about Zod. I know I said a lot of good stuff about him, but for one, he has telekinesis in this film for some reason, and he shouldn't. At least not to my knowledge. I mean, I'm not a Superman comics big guy. I've not read a whole lot of Superman, so I don't know if there's some type of context I'm missing. I don't know if they were basing it off something else in the comics that I don't quite understand. But basically, Zod should just have the same powers as Superman. I mean, that's kind of what happens in Man of Steel, which makes perfect sense. I mean, they're both of the similar genetic makeup, so the fact that they're both under the yellow sun means they should have the same powers, or at least very, very similar ones. Telekinesis, that's just why. I also feel like they waste a lot of potential, too, because, and again, I'm not a comics guy. I don't know how long ago this was established, but in case you don't know this, General Zod is Superman's uncle, right? Now, there could have been so much good potential that we could have seen with that dichotomy, you know, of Superman and his uncle fighting it out for whatever reasons, different things. But in this, he's just kind of like, yeah, I'm a Kryptonian bad guy, and now I'm back to be a bad guy, and I want to take things over and rule people, which I don't think is a terrible concept, but I think when you're doing it with this character, it's disappointing because this character has so much more nuance than that, and so I feel like they're just kind of throwing that away. Now, I don't know if that's just me in my modern-day perspective. I can't say I appreciate that. And something else I don't get in this film, so Superman and Lois go back to the Fortress of Solitude, and Superman talking to his holograph mom again. She basically tells him that if he wants to be with Lois, he needs to basically get rid of his powers, go into this funny chamber, and, you know, it kind of like transforms him. And why exactly? They don't say why you have to do it. They're just like, oh yeah, because of blah, 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 you have to do this. And I'm like, does he though? If he's the last son of Krypton and the rest of the Kryptonians are long gone by now, does he really need to follow their rules like that? I understand wanting to preserve culture, but you can't preserve culture of a society that's dead and you're the only person there. And not to mention, if you do just become a human, you're not preserving the Kryptonian culture at all because then you cannot make more Kryptonians. So I don't know about you. I think that's dumb. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just overthinking this, geeking out about it. It's weird. But the other thing I got to say too, the end of the film, a lot of gripes here specifically. Mainly because they have their final confrontation in the Fortress of Solitude, which is not a bad idea. There's a few things that are bad. For one, there are all these superpowers that are happening or showing up, and they don't explain them at all. I mentioned Zod's telekinesis doesn't make any sense to me. And then for some reason, Zod and the big guy, they turn invisible for some period of time, which, why is that happening? I don't understand. They don't explain it. Is that another power that they had? Why haven't they used this power before? Why are they just doing it now? I don't know what's going on here. Superman also, at the beginning of this fight, throws this giant, like, vinyl, like plastic Superman emblem at the big guy to knock him down or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, what is that? What is it supposed to do? Why is it here? And why didn't it work? It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, if they explained the Fortress of Solitude had many cool traps and gizmos that would help Superman out earlier in the film, and they stated that explicitly, that would have been a little different, but they didn't do any of that. So I have nothing but complaints about how this was executed. It was not great. Another thing that Superman does is he makes like holographic clones of himself too to like throw off the bad guys, which makes sense, meaning like it's a good tactic, but they also don't explain it. So I don't know what the heck is going on. Is this a Fortress of Solitude exclusive thing, or is this like a I don't know. Again, because they don't explain any of this stuff, I don't know how it's supposed to work. But anyways, the rest of the final battle, how they conclude things with, you know, the Red Sun chamber stuff, I think that's fine. I think that makes sense. I'm quite satisfied with that. Everything building up to that point, I can't. It's not very good. The fight at the end though in the city is pretty decent before this Fortress of Solitude fight, but Border Sawtooth fight is not good at all, just very poorly made. And then another thing I hate too, and they did this in Superman comics a lot back in like 70s and like the late 60s, I think. They just kind of gave Superman these weird powers that he never asked for, no one ever needed him to have, just to give him more powers to make him just the more Superman, which was just totally dumb. One of those appears in this film, which is this like amnesia kiss thing that Clark does to Lois and makes her forget that he's Superman. And I have a lot of thoughts about it because, for one, I think that Lois having the mental turmoil about everything that happens, knowing that Clark is Superman, everything like that, that is a very valid and very interesting concept. I hate how they handled it with this, because what they do is they hand you this like 5-course meal of interesting things, interesting dynamics you can go with, and then they're just like, yeah, I'm just going to take, a side of fries and call it that. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. That is the like lamest way out. You just wasted so much goodness right there. And it's very disappointing. But anyways, moving on to my notes, okay? I have two things I got to say. For one, I mentioned in my Superman review, pacing of the first film, I did not think was very good. And I had a lot of issues with the story and the plot and everything like that. The pacing is much better in this film. It is not perfect. It's still better, though, than what we saw. And so I do appreciate that. And that helped my enjoyment of it quite a bit. However, on the downside, this was, the 70s, the late 70s. They didn't have great special effects. They had really good VFX in the first Superman movie. They're not as good in this one, unfortunately. Now, I'm not going to knock that too hard and put it in the bad section because, again, like I said, it's 1970s, so I don't expect great from them to begin with. But I feel like this was definitely a downgrade from the last movie, because the last movie had some good moments where I was thinking to myself, how did they actually shoot that? Because obviously, there were green screen moments, there were things here and there were, that and this too. But I never scratched my head and thought to myself, how did they get this shot? Because it looked very green screen, blue screen, whatever the heck it was at that point. And so I was not impressed with that at all. Overall, though, Superman 2, okay, I think it is definitely better than the first Superman movie. I don't think it's leaps and bounds better than the first Superman movie, but it's not bad. It's all right. I definitely, like, if I go back to rewatch. Now, I forgot a lot about this movie, actually, when I went to go rewatch it, because I haven't watched it in a really long time. It's many, many years. And I definitely had a better time watching this than the first Superman movie, but this movie still got a lot of issues. So that all being said, I'm going to give this film a 6 out of 10. And ladies and gentlemen, that is my review of Superman 2. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to see more Superman films, because I will be reviewing them. We got Superman 3, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, Superman Returns, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be finishing things with Superman, okay? The James Gunn one, 2025. We're going to be wrapping things up with that. We're building up to that. So if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell. It's going to be fantastic. And hey, what did you think of Superman 2? Leave a comment below. Let me know if you thought it was good, if it was bad, if it holds up. I don't know. I want to know what you guys think. How did you like it compared to the first Superman movie? That's something I'm very curious about. So do all that stuff. Hit the like button if you do so choose. But until then, I'm K-Swope, and I will see you in the next one.